I wasn't even supposed to be there. My meeting wrapped up early, and for once I wasn't rushing to the next thing. I thought I'd surprise David, swing by his office, maybe grab a late lunch together. I parked, walked up, and as I neared the hallway, I heard laughter. His voice, relaxed, smug. Then I heard the words that split something inside me like glass under a boot. Once the timing's right, I'll file. Half of everything. She won't see it coming. For a second, I didn't breathe. My body just paused. I wasn't sure if I'd misheard or if maybe this was some cruel inside joke. But the way he laughed, that low, satisfied kind of laugh, told me everything I needed to know. My ears rang, my throat tightened. I didn't move, not because I couldn't, but because something inside me had already shifted into silence. I didn't walk in. I didn't scream or cry or make a scene. I stood there, perfectly still, like a ghost watching her own life fall apart. In that instant, I realized two things. One, the man I married never actually admired my success. He resented it. And two, he had no idea who he was playing with. That was the moment I stopped being his wife and started becoming something else entirely. I turned, calmly, like it was just another Tuesday. My heart was thudding, but my face didn't show it. I got in my car, pulled out of the lot, and drove. Not home, not to anyone. Just somewhere I could think. My mind wasn't spiraling, it was sharpening, and as I stared at the red light ahead of me, I smiled, walked away, and started preparing to give him exactly what he deserved. I spent the next few days moving through my routines like I was sleepwalking. Coffee, calls, meetings, all on autopilot. But under the surface, every second was a calculation. I kept replaying his voice in my head, those exact words, like they were branded onto the inside of my skull. Half of everything. She won't see it coming. Oh, but I did. And that was his first mistake. The nights were the hardest. Lying next to him, pretending to be tired, pretending to be fine. I could feel the weight of his betrayal between us, like another body in the bed. He'd kiss my forehead, tell me he loved me, then roll over like nothing had changed. And I'd stare at the ceiling, making lists in my mind, steps, names, possibilities. I wasn't falling apart, I was drafting my blueprint. I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. His smirks when he thought I wasn't looking. The locked drawer in his home office. The way his stories started having holes, delays, and convenient forgetfulness. I listened more carefully. I asked fewer questions, because now every lie he told me was a gift, a breadcrumb I could collect and use later, and I planned to use every single one. What haunted me most wasn't the betrayal, it was the performance. How easily he played the part of the loving husband. How casually he touched my back at dinner, complimented my ideas, laughed at my jokes. It was all a script, and I realized painfully I'd been the one auditioning for a role in his story, not the other way around. That realization didn't break me. It focused me. I began thinking like a strategist, not a wife. I started reviewing every conversation, every shared account, every signature we'd ever put side by side. This wasn't going to be about rage. Rage was too loud. This would be about precision, timing. I wasn't going to fight him in the open. I was going to build the kind of quiet that makes a man believe he's already won. Let him lean back while I twist the knife. He had no idea the moment I walked away from that hallway was the moment I walked into a war room. Not of chaos, of clarity. I wasn't planning to get even. I was planning to get everything. But first I needed to become what he feared least. The quiet, devoted wife who never saw it coming. The next morning I smiled as I poured his coffee. He kissed my cheek, completely unaware I'd already hired one of the most cutthroat divorce attorneys in the city. The kind who didn't blink at billion-dollar asset wars. And then I found a private investigator, discreet, surgical, with no appetite for gossip. I told them everything. but not once did I cry. I was done bleeding. My days became a performance layered with strategy. While David texted me sweet nothings from work, I was rerouting company shares into a newly formed trust, one he didn't even know existed. I moved funds slowly, carefully, each transaction buried beneath legitimate business activity. I studied every corner of our estate plan and began stitching a new one, tighter and smarter. At home, I played my role to perfection. Dinners with his favorite wine, weekend getaways, long walks where I asked about his dreams. I let him feel adored, in control, even as I erased his fingerprints from every part of my empire. I knew the timing had to be perfect. He couldn't suspect, because the moment he did, the game would shift, and I wanted the deck stacked long before that happened. Every evening, I'd look him in the eye and ask about his day, nodding like I cared about the little frustrations he aired, a missed meeting, a lazy intern, a traffic jam. Meanwhile, I was gathering quiet ammunition. I set up digital alerts for his bank activity, traced the money he thought was hidden, and fed those findings to my lawyer like puzzle pieces. And David? He kept smiling. I planted traps, soft, invisible ones. Left a draft of a fake legal document on the printer to see if he'd take the bait. Casually mentioned our business assets during a glass of wine to see how much he'd correct me. I watched his reactions, his hesitation, the flickers in his eyes. He didn't know I was recording everything, but more than that, he didn't know I had stopped being afraid of him. He still thought I was playing catch-up, still assumed I was one step behind. That was his second mistake. The thing about people like David is they confuse silence with submission. But my silence wasn't surrender. It was the sound of bricks being laid, one by one, for a very elegant trap. And I was almost ready to let him walk right into it. I even started keeping a journal, not for healing, but for leverage. Every lie he told, every manipulation, every time he feigned love while scheming behind my back, I documented it with timestamps, context, and cross-references. I knew the law well enough to make every page count. I wasn't building a diary. I was building a case file. He told friends we were doing great, posted pictures from our anniversary trip with hashtags like unblessed and unpower couple. I let him. I wanted him to write that narrative because when the truth surfaced, the contrast would be damning. Every illusion he painted would work against him. And I smiled through all of it, because I already knew how the story ended. He thought I was oblivious. He thought he was moving silently toward his win. But while he was rehearsing his exit, I was rehearsing my opening statement. He believed he was the only one holding cards. Poor man. He never noticed the table belonged to me the entire time. The shift in him was gradual, but unmistakable. He started acting like he was in control of something I wasn't aware of, which was almost amusing considering. He stayed out later. His compliments became rare, replaced by passive-aggressive jabs disguised as jokes. "You're always so serious lately," he'd say, smirking. I'd laugh lightly, playing my part. Let him feel bold. Let him believe he was slipping away unnoticed. I became softer with him, just enough to make him comfortable. I'd ask if he was happy. I'd gently wonder if he needed more space, more time, more freedom. I wanted him to feel safe enough to make the first move, to think it was his idea. Because the truth was, I needed him to file. That was the only way the trap would lock shut exactly the way I'd planned it. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I finalized everything. My legal team worked with the precision of surgeons. We drafted a retroactive prenup under the guise of a routine estate update. I presented it with a smile, saying it was just to protect my company in case anything ever happened. He barely read it, signed it between sips of bourbon, thought it was smart business. Thought I was still naive. After that, I gave him space to feel powerful. I planned weekends he could cancel last minute. I feigned confusion when he forgot our plans. I even thanked him for being so hard-working, so dedicated. He soaked it up like a sponge, thinking I was softening, letting go. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't pulling away. I was handing him the rope he needed to hang himself. He started hinting at the future in ways he thought were subtle. Things like, if we ever split, you'd be fine on your own. Or, I've got to think about my financial independence too. I'd nod, pretend to feel stung, but never push back. It was fascinating, honestly. Watching a man reveal himself one breadcrumb at a time, believing he was the only one playing a game. Then one night, just after dinner, he told me we needed to talk. I already knew what was coming. He tried to play it gently, said we'd grown apart, that it wasn't anyone's fault, that he wanted a peaceful process. I touched his hand, told him I understood, told him I wanted what was fair. And inside, I lit the match. The next morning he filed, walked into the kitchen with a strange mix of guilt and arrogance, sipping his coffee like he'd just done us both a favor. "It'll be clean," he said. "Civil." I nodded and kissed his cheek. I even made him eggs. I wanted that moment burned into his memory, the last time he thought he had the upper hand. What he didn't know was that my attorney had already anticipated every move. The prenup he signed would lock him out of everything he was counting on. The asset trail was already secured. The evidence, digital, financial, verbal, lined up with timestamps, context, intent. And best of all, he had no idea he'd walked straight into his own filing like a man stepping on glass barefoot. He thought he was ending the game, but I had just opened my playbook, and this time there would be no second chances, no whispered apologies, no rewrites. He'd made his move. Now it was my turn to make him watch it all fall apart. He walked into the courtroom wearing a tailored suit and that smug half-smile he always reserved for big wins. His lawyer, expensive, overconfident, maybe even a little too relaxed, greeted me like I was the one unprepared. They both expected tears, hesitation, a desperate woman clinging to the pieces of her life. I gave them neither, just a nod, calm, measured, cold maybe, but focused. As proceedings began, David sat back like a man about to collect a prize. He claimed half the business, half the assets, half of everything I'd built with blood and years. His voice never trembled. He looked the judge in the eye, as if this was justice, as if I owed him something. My attorney let him speak. Let him paint his version of the marriage. Let him dig his own grave, one confident sentence at a time. Then we stood. My lawyer didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He handed the judge a binder, 3 inches thick, color-coded, time-stamped, and sourced. Inside were the signed agreements David had forgotten, the asset transfers, the financial trails. More than that, there were the recordings. His voice, crystal clear, laying out his plan, the intent to deceive, to manipulate, to walk away with a fortune he hadn't earned. I watched David's expression shift in real time. First confusion, then discomfort, then panic. His attorney leaned in, whispering furiously, flipping through the pages like maybe something had been planted. But no, it was all real. All him. Every smirk, every scheme, every damning sentence spoken when he thought no one was listening. His voice filled the room, and for once, it didn't charm. It condemned. My lawyer remained composed. He addressed the judge with respect, not drama. "Your Honor," he said, "this wasn't a breakdown of a marriage. This was a strategy. A calculated attempt to extract wealth under false pretenses." He slid forward another document, an affidavit from our investigator, detailing David's financial maneuvers, his burner accounts, even the shell company he tried to hide behind. The courtroom went still. David tried to object, mumbled something about misrepresentation, about context, but it was too late. The damage wasn't just done, it was documented. All the control he thought he had, all the leverage he believed he'd built, dissolved in front of him. And as I sat there, watching him unravel, I didn't feel vengeance. I felt relief. Not because I'd won, but because the mask had finally slipped. The judge reviewed the files in silence, flipping page after page while David fidgeted beside his attorney. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but it struck like thunder. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "not only have you failed to justify your claims, but the evidence suggests a premeditated attempt to exploit your spouse financially." Her gavel hadn't fallen yet, but everyone in the room knew. It was over. She ruled in my favor, fully and without hesitation. David was awarded nothing. No spousal support, no stake in the business, not a single asset. Worse, the court referred him for investigation into financial coercion and attempted fraud. His lawyer looked stunned. David looked like he'd swallowed a nail. For once, there was no clever line, no charm to soften the blow, just silence. He didn't just lose the money, he lost the mask. And that, more than anything, was the true sentence. Because a man like David doesn't fear poverty, he fears exposure. And now, every person he ever fooled would see him for exactly what he was. No edits, no escape. News travels fast when it's scandal wrapped in elegance. Within days, the story leaked. A failed husband trying to defraud his self-made wife only to be outplayed at his own game. He was fired before he even had the chance to explain. His firm issued a vague statement about ethical concerns, but everyone knew. His name started disappearing from deals, events, invitations. Doors he once walked through without question now stayed shut. He reached out once. A long, rambling email at 2:13 a.m., apologizing, blaming, reminiscing. I didn't respond. Not because I had nothing to say, but because some stories don't deserve a sequel. He made his choices, and now he'd have to live in the version of life he carved out with lies. No money, no reputation, no carefully curated image to lean on. Just himself. As for me, I moved forward. Not bitter, just clear. I reinvested in my company, expanded to markets I'd paused for too long, took meetings without the second guessing that had once crept in. I breathed differently. I walked differently. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone, especially not to the man who mistook me for a stepping stone. One afternoon, I stood on the balcony of a penthouse overlooking the city. It had high glass windows, a sculpted marble kitchen, and a view that stretched for miles. The very same place David once pointed at in a magazine and called our dream home. Back then, we'd laughed, imagining dinner parties and sunrises. He had no idea I'd eventually buy it, alone, with cash he'd never touch. But I didn't move in. Instead, I turned it into offices, leased it out to a firm specializing in high-profile divorces. Smart, fierce attorneys, women-led mostly, the kind who knew exactly how to dismantle a lie in court. Every time I walked through the lobby, I passed by the plaque with their name on it and smiled. I had no interest in vengeance. I preferred legacy. And yet, I sent him a gift. Wrapped neatly in brown paper, no card. Inside was a book, How to Lose Everything by Underestimating a Woman. I imagine he opened it with shaking hands, half hoping it wasn't from me. But of course he knew. He always knew I'd finish what he started, just not the way he expected. Some nights, I still think about that moment outside his office, the exact second my world cracked, and how somehow it made me stronger. I used to believe that love was about loyalty, about compromise, about holding on. But now I understand. Love doesn't require you to shrink. Real love expands you. What he offered was never love. It was possession wrapped in compliments and control. I don't tell this story for applause. I tell it for the women who sit in silence, sensing the ground shift beneath them, but too afraid to name it. I want them to know you can walk through the fire and still come out dressed in dignity. You can lose what you thought was everything and still win. You can be soft and strategic, heartbroken and unbreakable. He wanted half my world. He planned it, whispered it, laughed about it. But I gave him something more valuable than money. I gave him a full, brutal, unforgettable lesson in exactly what it costs to underestimate a woman like me.